Hi, Roman Dace here, back with another video about Middle-earth role-playing game from the 1980s by Iron Crown Enterprises. We're going to be looking at The Riders of Rohan, everyone's favorite from the Lord of the Rings trilogy. This is 3100 in the campaign series, and you get to ride with the Rohirrim as they struggle against the hordes of Easterlings and Orcs of the White Hand. So you're going to get 3 separate periods, and it includes layouts for Helm's Deep, Edoras, Dunharrow, and the Harrowdale. And you get information about the characters. This was a pretty cool campaign module, I thought. Gave a lot of detail. It has 6 full color pages and a 2-page map of the Hornburg area, plus maps of Framsburg and the Druiden Forest, Edoras, and a regional map of Rohan. So you're getting major layouts, you're getting the overview of the riders and other inhabitants. This book came out in 1985. I have the second edition because it includes the new full-color regional map from 1987. I got this from Endless Adventure back in the late 80s, probably 89. If I wasn't spending my money on the girls, I was spending it on these games. It was a toss-up. Middle-earth role-playing doesn't talk back. Well, let's look at the maps first. You see the first map is just the regional map of just Rohan, Fangorn Forest, parts of Dunland, and of course Isengard, and also the west march of Rohan. So the regional map doesn't really give you a heck of a lot as far as that goes. You flip it over, and it does give you the paths of the dead, so you can start from Edoras, and you follow the path of the dead all the way to the Vale of Eric and Morthondost, and the stone that Aragorn goes to when he summons the army of the dead. And then it also gives you the Druiden Forest. So it has the Wolves Village, a Wolves Path, and the Beacon Tower of Elenak. So those were the guys that helped King Theoden and Aelmer bypass an army of orcs that were sitting on the road, waiting for them on their way to relieve the siege of Minas Tirith. Unfortunately, Peter Jackson never mentioned these guys, which is kind of a shame. I always wish Peter Jackson had made 2 movies. He made the one that got released in the theater as a theatrical, and then for the extended version, he had gone back and put everything that he left out. That would have made it so much cooler, but he didn't do that. Then the second map has the Deeping-coomb, which is an English word for valley, and that's where you have Helm's Deep, the Hornburg, which was a former Gondorian fortress. And then one of the areas you're going to look at is the Juggler's Close. That's where one of the campaign adventures is. And on the other side, it gives you the city of Edoras. I like the layout of this city better than what Peter Jackson showed in his movie. This looks more like a hill fort type idea with a golden hall, much like Anglo-Saxon period. And then he also has Framsburg, which was far to the north between 2 rivers that make up the Anduin, way up north towards the Misty Mountains and the Grey Mountains. You have the Misty Mountains on your west side. North you have the Grey Mountains, and then east you have Mirkwood, and south you just have the long Anduin. So that's where the Eorl the Young came from. So it does give that, which I thought was really cool. Gives you a population map as well. So in the summer, Edoras has like 875 people, but in the winter it'd have like almost 10,000. Which for a horse culture, that kind of makes sense. And then when you flip open the book, you also get another black and white regional map detailing the individual regions. So the East and West Annet, Westfold, Eastfold, West March, Dunland, Fangorn Forest, the Wold, and the Misty Mountains. This is also the first book that had Angus MacBride cover art. He became probably the best cover artist that they employed, and he has his own book called Characters of Middle-earth. But this is one of the first that he made that I've seen. The author of this one was Christian Gaiman and Peter Fenlon, with Jessica Ney giving additional text. And the editor was also Peter Fenlon. So Peter Fenlon and Jessica Ney are in this all over. So to go through the book, again, the basic guidelines, definitions, adapting the module to your campaign. Nothing new there. Converting stats, converting spell lists, locks, traps, all that stuff. And then it goes right into a historical overview. So it talks about how they arrived in the east of Mirkwood when they were called the Eothram. So basically from the first year of the Third Age all the way to 1856, they were the Eothram. Then after the Wainrider Wars, they headed north and became the Ethiod until 2510 when they helped the Stewart Cirion defeat the Balchoth. Then they became the Rohirrim. So it gives you that timeline. And you can see in this little box move, you can see where they went from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. It's got a pretty cool picture there. And then it goes through the lords, the horse lords. So the kind of line that they take. So they start off with the Eothram, which is pretty cool. They go, this is like a 3-stage thing. And they talk about the land of Rhovanion, which was east of Mirkwood and west of the Sea of Rune. So it's a pretty wide region stretching from the lonely Erebor Dale and the Lonely Mountains to the Iron Hills, following to the Sea of Rune and the Carnan River, all the way south to the Fences of Mordor, was considered the land of Rhovanion. It talks about weather, ecology, flora, fauna. Then it goes right into the Eothram culture, the horse clans. So they break them down into clans. So it gives 6 major horse clan tribes. Saxons weren't really that big on horses, even though the Tolkien had the Anglo-Saxons in mind when he created the Rohirrim. When you talk like this, it's almost like you're talking about the Mongols with the tribes. And it goes into their economy, the society, settlement patterns. It just gives so much rich information background. Makes them seem alive. And that's what I like. The men and women, child rearing, values, food and drink, warfare, and warcraft. So this is where you get the first divisions. They had a pretty cool warfare system of organization. And then you have the politics and power, and you get friends and enemies. So their friends were the Dorwinium in the Ruining area, while their enemies were the Wain Riders, the Sagath and the Logath, as well as the Asdriags. Then you have the Gondorians and the Northmen. And you get some figures of note, being Vidugavia, Makar, and it gives you one of the bad guys, Tros Hasnef. So so figures of note, NPCs, which are always good. Historical background. Some of the names, like Vidugavia, are in Lord of the Rings. And then finally it gives you places of note. So it gives you Bur Maring, and that would be, you got the Northman sod wall, with a ditch and a dike, longhouses with a central hall. And then it also gives you the Wayne town of Elainen, which would be like a Sagath village. Then it has some stuff near the woods, like a wood cave. And it gives you some Eothram adventures, like the death of a Thin. A Thin is like a local leader who has to bring his forces in time of war. Saxons and the Norse had those Thins, or Thanes as they were called. The Danes had Thanes, I believe. Then you have Wain Rider treason. And then finally it goes into Ethia when they migrate into the Vales of the Anduin. And it talks about why they left the Middle Vales, simply because it was getting too dull Goldor was getting to be a bad place. So it gives you the setting, the ecology and all that stuff. So it gives you the setting, the ecology and all that stuff. And it talks about how they used to be in Mathelburg, but then moved to Franzburg. And it has a guy, Marined's Watch, like a watch area. And then it gives you the adventures with the Aetho. This one's not so much. The claim of Intigast. Intigast was a dragon. Not quite like Sagath the Worm, Eorl the Young's father slew. But it gives you a dragon horde, and the Balchoth conspiracy. So that one's a pretty brief selection. But then it gives you the Rohirrim. It talks about Eorl's ride, the battle of the Field of Celebrant, and the Oath of Eorl. And then finally the setting. Then it gives you the setting of the land that they found and created. So that's pretty cool. So much background information in these books. Then it talks about the people, how they were. And then it talks about how probably there's like 100,000 people living in Rohan. Just over 100,000. Which makes sense because in the War of the Ring, the peak strength of Rohan was probably 12,000 riders. Which is about right. And they were scattered with villages and homesteads. So very much like a rancher style lifestyle. And it talks about politics and power, Rohirric military organization and warcraft. Now Tolkien did go into detail about the Rohirrim military organization in Unfinished Tales. You have to read that, the Battle of the Fords of Isen. So you'd have the Oher, which would be the entire levy, the Huskarls, which are like the king's bodyguard. Then you have what's called a half-hare, which would be led by a marshal. There were 3 marshals in Rohan. Marshal of the East Fold, the West Fold, and then the central capital region would have a marshal as well. So the first marshal would be from them. Usually the king is the first marshal, and then the time of the War of the Ring, Theodred was the second marshal, and the third marshal was Eomer. And then you have the Thanes, and they would command 120 men. And there are 100 of them. And then you have a half-fred, 12-fred, and then a half-fred. So it with the He-Carl and Carl. So it does give a pretty cool, it follows Tolkien right to a T. Then it talks about the friends of the Northmen. You have the Gondorians. Elves are friends, but not really. Not really. They only interfere a couple of times. There are no elves at Helm's Deep. Peter Jackson put in, which I hated. The Ents of Fangorn. You know, they have friends, but they don't really converse with them too much. It's more like a surprise. And then you have the Servants of the White Hand and the Dunlandings, which are become their enemies. The Dunlendings hate the Rohirrim because they figure they stole land from them. Kind of like here in Canada where we have people saying we stole a nation's land. And then it talks about the Dunlendings, the Easterlings, which in the first years of Rohan, they still raided across the Undeeps of the Anduin. And then it goes into the half-orcs, which is Saruman's created. And then it also has the Druidane, or Drugs as they're called, or Wozes. I actually just bought, my last Games Workshop was the Wozes. I'm getting them in the mail. I'm so glad they brought those back out. So the figures to note, you go with 2700s. You have Helm Hammerhand and Freka. Freka was more of a Dunish blood in him, so he asked for the king's hand. Helm slew him and touched off a civil war, all the Dunland subjects in their kingdom. And it led to the death of Helm Hammerhand and his sons, and created the second line, which is Theoden's line. So it talks about Wolf, who was Freka's son, who created that civil war. And then it goes to Theoden, Grim of Wormtongue, Eowyn, Eomer, who was king of the third line of Rohan, before finally going to places of note. And you got Edoras, the Golden Hall, with the King's Barrow, so that map comes in handy. It does talk about Dunharrow and Harrowdale and the Pass of the Dead. And it touches on Helm's Deep, so you get a pretty cool picture of Helm's Deep here, with that deeping wall shot. So you got Helm's Deep there, which is pretty cool. So they do talk about the rear gates, the outer gates. The glittering caves are mentioned briefly. Doesn't give much detail other than that. They could have made this into one of the Fortress series that they made later on. I wish they had done Helm's Deep as one, but they never did. They talk about the keep. And then finally the Juggler's Close, which is one of the adventures. And the Awful Stair, which is kind of like a rip-off of Durin's Stair and the Stair at Cirith Ungol. And it talks about the Juggler's School. I guess they're a bunch of thieves. And then you just got a basic layout signal tower. And as well as the Inn of the Greys, which is like your typical inn. Basically, the Rohirrim came in and the structure was already there for a lot of the places they took over. Because the Kalinardans had been building, little watchtowers, signal towers, and had their homesteads. So the Rohirrim came in and either took it over or rebuilt. And then you have the Druiden Forest. So adventures with the riders. You got the Dunlending Path, so that's during the war with Wolf. The Awful Stair. It's about the Juggler's Close School. Darkfall in the Woeswood during the War of the Ring. Not much for adventures, really. Rohan doesn't have a lot of adventure settings, really. But this is the thing I like. The Master Military Tables, because then it goes back over Eothram with the Osdregs and the Sagath Wain Riders and the Logath. And then it goes into the Anduin Vales years with the Ethiod and the Balchoth. And also gives you orcs that also attack the Gondorians in the rear. Then it goes into the Rohirrim period and gives you the Army of the White Hand, which is something that the other book, Isengard in Northern Gondor, never touched upon, was Saruman's army. And Saruman also used Dunlendings, which Peter Jackson he had Dunlendings do raiding, burning people, but he never actually had them in the battle. And then it has the Druida and the numbers there. So that's kind of cool. It gives you a lot of things. And then finally going into the NPC character of historical figures and people for the adventurers and prominent individuals, before finally ending off with a master encounter table and a master beast table. And then it does give you the inlet for for Southern Rhovania, which was in the Southern Mirkwood book. Overall, it gave a lot of information, filled in a lot of gaps, because like I said, Tolkien never had time to fill in everything, because he was just such a busy individual himself and always never satisfied with his own work. So he wouldn't be satisfied with what these guys wrote, but he would understand the spirit of the thing and would appreciate their attempts. Fill in the gaps that he just didn't have time to fill in. As far as playing this with a group of people, it just doesn't work because Rohan is pretty boring. It's only during times of crisis that it becomes cool. So if you're like the Grey Company, the Dunedain of Arnor, who come riding to Aragorn's aid, had they arrived a week before the Battle of Helm's Deep, they might have run smack dab into the Battle of the Fords of Isen, and then things might have been different. You could do something like that, like try and sneak a group of guys past that, or join it. Or you could be at the Battle of Helm's Deep and ride out with Theoden. But the Master Military Table was pretty cool. Then you can use it because Middle-earth role-playing did. Later on, they do bring out how to deal with big armies. Anyway, that's all I have for that. Anyone else ever played this? I used it not so much as I used the Arthedain book, but I like to see anyone else used it and what they came up with. But anyway, until next time, it's Roman Daysel. I'm out of here.
Black riders played the countryside from Ghost Ride.